On the evening of May 26th, in the usually peaceful Maplewood neighborhood, an unexpected tragedy shattered the calm. Mike Williams, a man who seemed to have it all, was discovered dead in his home. What initially seemed like a tragic accident quickly unfolded into something much more unsettling. As detectives investigated further, a startling tale of hidden desires and betrayal came to light. To fully grasp who Mike was and why his secret led to his untimely death, we must first revisit the origins of this tragic story and introduce you to the couple whose involvement would ultimately alter the course of Mike's life, Megan and Tom Anderson. Megan and Tom Anderson seemed like the perfect couple to everyone who knew them. Megan, who is 37 years old, is a vibrant schoolteacher known for her warm smile and lively personality. Her husband, Tom, who is 39 years old, works as an IT manager and has always been seen as the steady, reliable partner in their marriage. Together, they live in a beautiful suburban home and are well liked by their neighbors and friends. But not for long, because if this couple knew what was coming, they would wish they could turn back time, because beneath the polished surface, things were far from perfect. Megan felt like she was slowly suffocating under the weight of her routine life. The spark in her marriage had faded, replaced by the dull hum of everyday chores and the silent nights spent side by side but miles apart. She craved excitement, something to shake her from the numbness that had crept into her heart. Tom, meanwhile, was oblivious to his wife's growing dissatisfaction. He had thrown himself into his work, often staying late at the office or spending hours in front of his computer at home. The thrill of their early years together had been replaced by the comfort of stability, but he had failed to notice that what felt like stability to him felt like stagnation to Megan. Desperate for a change, Megan convinced Tom to join her for a night out, something they hadn't done in ages. They went to a lively bar downtown, a place buzzing with energy and filled with people who seemed to be enjoying life in a way that Megan envied. As they sipped their drinks, Megan's eyes roamed the room, searching for something, anything, that could break the monotony of her life. That's when she spotted Rachel and Mike Williams across the bar. Rachel, a striking woman in her early 40s, with fiery red hair and an even fierier personality, immediately caught Megan's attention. She exuded confidence and charm, the kind that made people stop and take notice. Mike, her husband, was equally captivating with his easy smile and laid-back demeanor. At 43 years old, he was the kind of man who seemed comfortable in his own skin, with a playful twinkle in his eye that hinted at a life full of adventure. Rachel and Mike noticed Megan and Tom too, and with a mischievous grin, Rachel made her way over to their table. "Mind if we join you?" she asked, her voice smooth and inviting. Megan welcomed them eagerly, feeling an instant connection. The four of them began to chat, and it didn't take long for the conversation to turn lively and flirtatious. Megan found herself drawn to Rachel's boldness, the way she spoke with such confidence and didn't seem to care what anyone thought. Tom, meanwhile, was captivated by Mike's stories of travel and adventure, tales that made him long for something more than his desk job and quiet home life. As the night went on and the drinks flowed, Rachel leaned in closer to Megan, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You know, Mike and I have a little secret," she said, her eyes gleaming with mischief. Megan's heart raced. She could feel the excitement building, a tingling sensation that spread from her toes to her fingertips. "What kind of secret?" she asked, her voice barely more than a breath. Rachel glanced at Mike, who nodded encouragingly. "Sometimes," she said, her voice low and tantalizing, "we like to swap partners. Just for fun, you know, to keep things exciting." The words hit Megan like a bolt of lightning. sending a shock of adrenaline coursing through her veins. She glanced at Tom, who looked just as stunned as she felt. This was so far beyond anything they had ever considered, so far outside their comfort zone. And yet the idea of it, the thrill of trying something completely new, something that could reignite the passion they had lost, was intoxicating. Tom cleared his throat, trying to mask his surprise with a nervous laugh. "Wow, that's interesting," he said, his mind spinning with the possibilities. He had never thought of something like this before, but seeing the way Megan's eyes lit up at Rachel's suggestion, he couldn't deny the curiosity it sparked in him. Rachel leaned back, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. "No pressure, of course, but if you're interested, we'd love to show you what it's all about. Just think of it as an adventure, something different, something to break up the routine." Megan's heart was pounding in her chest, her mind racing with a mix of fear and excitement. She had come out tonight looking for something to shake up her life, and this was more than she could have ever imagined. She glanced at Tom, searching his face for any sign of what he might be thinking. Tom looked back at her, and for the first time in a long time, Megan saw a spark in his eyes. It was the spark of curiosity, of possibility, of a willingness to take a risk. "What do you think?" he asked quietly, his voice tinged with both hesitation and intrigue. Megan took a deep breath, her mind swirling with the weight of the decision. This was completely out of character for them, a leap into the unknown. But maybe that was exactly what they needed. Maybe this was the chance to reignite the flame that had gone out long ago. With a nod, Megan made up her mind. "Okay," she said, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "Let's do it." Tom's eyes widened in surprise, but then he smiled, a slow, genuine smile that made Megan's heart flutter. "All right," he agreed, his voice filled with a mix of excitement and nerves. "Let's give it a shot." Rachel and Mike exchanged a knowing glance, their smiles widening as they raised their glasses in a toast. "To new adventures," Rachel said, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. "To new adventures," Megan and Tom echoed, clinking their glasses together. As they drank, the air around them seemed to buzz with electricity, charged with the promise of what was to come. The night was just beginning, and as they left the bar together, the path ahead was filled with uncertainty and excitement. Megan felt a thrill she hadn't felt in years, a sense of stepping off the edge into something wild and unknown. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for sure: nothing would ever be the same again. The drive to Rachel and Mike's house was filled with a charged silence. Megan could feel her heart pounding in her chest, a mix of nerves and excitement coursing through her. Tom, sitting beside her, seemed equally tense, his hands gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. They exchanged a brief glance, a silent acknowledgement of the leap they were about to take. Rachel's home was just a short distance from the bar, a cozy two-story house with soft, warm lighting that spilled out onto the front porch. As they walked inside, Megan couldn't help but notice the inviting atmosphere. The living room was decorated with eclectic artwork and plush furniture, creating a sense of comfort and intimacy. Rachel poured everyone a glass of wine, and they settled onto the couch, the conversation light and easy. But underneath the casual chatter, there was a palpable tension, an electric charge that filled the room. Megan sipped her wine, feeling the warmth spread through her, loosening the tight knot of anxiety in her stomach. Rachel, ever the instigator, leaned forward with a playful smile. "So, how do we want to do this?" she asked, her voice teasing yet serious. "Do we just dive right in? Or should we make it a little more interesting?" Megan's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the intensity of Rachel's gaze, the weight of the question hanging in the air. This was it, the moment where fantasy would become reality, where they would cross the line into something completely unknown. Mike, sensing the tension, stood up and extended his hand to Megan. "Why don't we let the ladies decide?" he suggested, his voice calm and inviting. "What do you think, Megan? Ready to try something new?" Megan hesitated for a moment, her mind racing. This was all happening so fast, the idea of swapping partners with another couple so far outside her comfort zone. But there was a part of her, a deep hidden part, that was thrilled by the prospect. She glanced at Tom, who gave her a reassuring nod, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and excitement. Taking a deep breath, Megan placed her hand in Mike's and stood up. "Okay," she said softly, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Let's do this." Rachel grinned, her eyes sparkling with mischief as she turned to Tom. "Looks like it's just you and me," she said, her voice low and sultry. Tom swallowed hard, his pulse quickening at the intensity in her gaze. They moved to separate rooms, the anticipation thick in the air. Megan felt her heart hammering in her chest as she followed Mike down the hallway. She was nervous, scared even, but also exhilarated by the thought of what was about to happen. This was so far beyond anything she had ever done, a step into uncharted territory that both terrified and thrilled her. Inside the guest bedroom, Mike turned to her, his expression serious yet gentle. "Are you okay with this?" he asked quietly, his eyes searching hers. "We can stop any time if you're not comfortable." Megan nodded, her throat dry. "I'm okay," she whispered, trying to calm the storm of emotions swirling inside her. "Let's just see what happens." The hours that followed were a blur of sensations and emotions for Megan and Tom. What started as an adventurous experiment quickly became an intense and surreal experience that neither of them had anticipated. Megan found herself entangled with Mike, their touches hesitant at first but growing bolder as the minutes passed. The thrill of being with someone new, someone who was not her husband, was exhilarating. She felt alive, every nerve ending tingling with a mix of fear and excitement. In the guest bedroom, Mike was attentive and gentle, always making sure Megan was comfortable. Despite the unfamiliarity, there was a strange sense of ease between them. Megan couldn't help but compare him to Tom. Mike was different, more spontaneous and carefree. The realization hit her with a mix of guilt and longing. She hadn't felt this way in years. Meanwhile, back in the living room, Rachel took charge with Tom. She was bold, direct, and confident, qualities that Tom found both intimidating and alluring. He was nervous, but Rachel's energy was infectious. She coaxed him out of his shell, guiding him through the experience with a knowing smile and a teasing laugh. For the first time in a long time, Tom felt desired in a way that reignited a spark within him. As the night continued, the boundaries between the two couples blurred even further. The intensity of the situation, the heightened emotions, and the physical intimacy all contributed to an atmosphere that was both thrilling and unsettling. Megan and Tom were both swept up in the novelty of it all, forgetting, if only for a moment, the lives they had left behind when they walked into Rachel and Mike's house. When it was all over, Megan and Tom returned to each other, both changed by the night's events. They exchanged a look, one of confusion, excitement, and maybe a little bit of fear. They had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The reality of what they had done started to sink in as they dressed in silence, the weight of their actions settling on their shoulders like a heavy cloak. Rachel and Mike, however, seemed unfazed. Rachel grinned at Megan and Tom, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "See? That wasn't so bad, was it?" she said, her voice light and teasing. "Sometimes a little adventure is just what a marriage needs." Megan forced a smile, her heart still racing. She wasn't sure how she felt. Part of her was exhilarated by what had happened. but another part of her was consumed with guilt and confusion. She glanced at Tom, who looked equally conflicted. He nodded slightly, a silent signal that they should leave. As they said their goodbyes and walked out into the cool night air, Megan felt a wave of relief wash over her. But that relief was short-lived. As they drove home in silence, the reality of what they had done began to set in. The thrill was gone, replaced by a creeping sense of dread. What had they just done, and what would this mean for their marriage? They arrived home and went straight to bed, neither of them speaking a word. Megan lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the night over and over in her mind. She could feel the distance between her and Tom growing, a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge. Megan's obsession with Mike continued to grow. She found herself daydreaming about him constantly, replaying their encounters in her mind. She started sneaking away to see him more frequently, lying to Tom about where she was going. The thrill of the affair consumed her, and she became reckless, ignoring the warning signs that her actions were tearing her marriage apart. Tom, increasingly suspicious and hurt by Megan's behavior, decided to confront her. He tried to talk to her about their marriage, about what had happened, but every conversation seemed to end in an argument. The tension between them was palpable, and it was clear that they were both spiraling into a dark place. One evening, after Megan had slipped out of the house for another secret meeting with Mike, Tom decided he couldn't take it anymore. The anger and jealousy that had been simmering inside him for weeks finally boiled over. He knew he had to confront Mike and put an end to this once and for all. Tom drove to Mike and Rachel's house, his mind racing with thoughts of betrayal and rage. When he arrived, he saw Megan's car parked outside, confirming his worst fears. His heart pounded as he made his way to the front door, his hands shaking with a mix of anger and fear. Inside, Megan and Mike were talking, their voices low and tense. Tom burst through the door, his face flushed with fury. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, his voice trembling with emotion. Megan and Mike froze, their faces paling as they realized they had been caught. Megan tried to explain, but Tom wouldn't listen. He was beyond reason, his mind clouded with anger and hurt. He lunged at Mike, shoving him back against the wall. A struggle ensued, fueled by a mix of rage, fear, and desperation. In the heat of the moment, Tom grabbed a heavy object from a nearby table and swung it with all his might. The impact was quick and sudden, and Mike crumpled to the floor, unconscious and bleeding. Megan screamed, rushing to Mike's side, but it was too late. The damage had been done. Tom stood there, panting, his eyes wide with shock as the reality of what he had just done began to sink in. He had never intended for things to go this far. All he wanted was to stop the affair, to win back his wife. But now, everything was ruined. Megan looked up at Tom, her eyes filled with a mixture of horror and disbelief. "What have you done?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Tom couldn't answer. He stumbled back, his mind racing as he tried to process what had just happened. The weight of his actions crashed down on him, suffocating him with guilt and regret. I didn't mean to," he stammered, his voice barely audible. He backed away slowly, his eyes darting around the room, as if looking for a way to escape. Megan, still kneeling beside Mike, reached for her phone with trembling hands, her mind reeling with panic and fear. She knew she had to call for help, but her fingers were numb, her body frozen with shock. As the reality of the situation set in, Tom turned and fled, leaving Megan behind in the dimly lit room. The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Megan's heart pounded in her chest as she realized that everything had changed in an instant. Their lives, once so stable and predictable, had been shattered by a single, irreversible act. The once quiet neighborhood was now filled with flashing police lights and murmuring voices. Megan sat on the front steps of Mike and Rachel's house, numb with shock. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to grasp what had happened. The love affair she thought would bring excitement had ended in disaster, tearing apart her life and everyone around her. The police moved quickly, securing the scene and separating Megan from the crowd. She was questioned briefly, but her answers were scattered and broken, her mind overwhelmed by the horror of the night. All she could think about was the look in Tom's eyes and the blood on the floor. Tom had driven off in a daze, consumed by regret and fear. He couldn't believe what he had done, how a moment of rage had spiraled into something so irreversible. After driving aimlessly for hours, he finally pulled over and sat in silence, unable to process the magnitude of his actions. When the police found Tom sitting in his car, he didn't resist. He was taken into custody without a word, his face blank and empty, knowing that his life and the lives of everyone he loved had been irrevocably shattered.
And so the night that began with the promise of adventure ended in tragedy, leaving behind only broken hearts and ruined lives. Do you want to see more of this? Then click on the video you're seeing on your screen now.